Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be diving into a tragic event that happened on Christmas Day, the Azerbaijan Airlines crash.
Yeah.
And, there's been a lot of information flying around, some of it conflicting.
Yeah.
And we're just going to try to make sense of it all using what we know so far.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's heartbreaking. But we're here to cut through the noise, see if we can piece together exactly what happened.
One of the things that makes this crash so interesting is the context of where it happened. It's not just some random plane crash in some quiet part of the world. This happened in a region that's already pretty tense,
That's a really good point. It wasn't just an unfortunate accident. This is an Azerbaijan Airlines flight leaving Baku, heading for Grozny in Chechnya. And instead of landing there, it ended up crashing hundreds of miles off course in Kazakhstan.
Right.
And tragically, 38 of the 67 people on board lost their lives.
Wow.
So the big question right out of the gate is, what in the world took this plane so far astray?
Well, you got to remember that at the time of this crash, Ukraine was in the middle of drone attacks targeting Chechnya. And Dmitry Yadrov, who heads Russia's civil aviation agency, actually said that the plane initially tried to land in Grozny while these attacks were happening.
Wow. So we're talking about a really tense situation even before we get into the crash itself.
Yeah.
Trying to land a plane during an active drone attack, that's got to be nerve-wracking for everybody involved.
Absolutely. And on top of that, Yadrov added that there was really heavy fog in Grozny, so visibility was extremely poor.
Oh, wow.
He actually described it as very complicated for flying. The pilot was given alternate airports to land at and ultimately chose to divert to Aktau.
Okay, so even with the fog and the drone attacks, why would this plane have veered so drastically off course?
Right.
That's what's so puzzling to me.
Yeah.
This is where the survivors' stories become so important.
Right.
And one survivor, Subhankul Rakimov, he said the plane was all over the place, behaving erratically, and then there was this huge bang.
And to add to the puzzle here, Rakimov told RT, which is the Russian state broadcaster, that shrapnel had actually pierced the plane.
Wow.
Now that detail suggests that something hit the plane from the outside, like an explosion of some sort, as opposed to a problem with the plane's mechanics.
That detail about the shrapnel definitely sends chills down my spine.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to wonder what could have caused an explosion like that. And this is where we get into those statements from a U.S. official who said there are early signs pointing to a Russian anti-aircraft system possibly hitting the plane.
Right. And this is where the information gets even more complex.
Yeah.
So that statement from the U.S. official, it aligns with what Ukrainian officials and some sources in Azerbaijan are saying.
Right.
However, the Kremlin is flat out denying it. They say the whole thing is still under investigation.
So we have a lot of different stories floating around. Even this early on, it's like a tangled web. Almost. What's really striking is that just hours after the crash, sources in Azerbaijan told Reuters that preliminary findings pointed to the plane being accidentally shot down by a Russian Pantsir-S air defense system.
Right.
So then we have Azerbaijani lawmaker Rasim Musabekov coming out and actually publicly calling on Russia to apologize and compensate the victims. And he went on to say that the plane was damaged over Grozny, wasn't allowed to land at nearby airports, and then was essentially sent away with its GPS system switched off. It's a chilling thought. I mean, imagine being on that plane.
Absolutely.
His argument, and I think it makes a lot of sense, is that if those air defenses were active, then that entire airspace should have been completely shut down.
Right.
They should have turned the plane around. So the question is, why didn't they do that? It just doesn't add up.
That's a really crucial question. This incident seems to raise some serious concerns about how air traffic control is managed in the region.
Right.
Especially during such a volatile, dangerous period.
And it's important to remember the impact of this crash goes way beyond the immediate tragedy.
Oh, absolutely.
Other airlines saw what happened and took action.
Yeah.
They weren't taking any chances.
Nope.
So Kazakhstan's Kazakh Air, they put a stop to all flights from Astana to Ekaterinburg for a whole month. Flydubai, a budget carrier, suspended flights to Sochi and Mineral Vody, and even El Al, Israel's national airline, halted flights from Tel Aviv to Moscow for an entire week.
Wow.
And they specifically cited developments in Russia's airspace as the reason.
That speaks volumes, doesn't it? Even without a definitive answer about what caused the crash.
Right.
The impact on regional air travel was pretty swift and significant. It really underscores the immense uncertainty and worry about airspace safety in the region.
So here we are, tragic plane crash, conflicting stories,
Right.
and a whole bunch of unanswered questions. It's a lot to take in. Where do we even begin to make sense of this?
It's a tangled web for sure.
Yeah.
This tragedy really underlines how complicated it is to operate within a volatile geopolitical landscape, you know?
We have to look at the potential ripple effects of this event, regardless of the root cause.
Yeah.
There are just so many layers to unravel here.
What's so unsettling is how quickly different versions of events can emerge, you know, in situations like this.
Oh, yeah.
It's a reminder that we really need to be cautious about the information we're consuming.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's more important than ever to scrutinize the information we're getting from various sources.
Right.
We have to be aware of any potential biases that might be shaping the narratives we're hearing.
It feels like we're just beginning to peel back the layers of this story.
Yes.
There's so much more to discover and understand.
That's the thing. We're just at the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
We have a lot more digging to do, but it's already clear that this incident has far-reaching consequences.
Right.
It touches on international relations, air travel safety,
Yeah.
and the ongoing conflict in the region.
It really highlights the critical need for transparency and a thorough investigation.
To figure out what truly caused this crash.
Yeah.
And to ensure that someone is held accountable.
And for that to happen, we need international cooperation. A thorough investigation will require countries to work together.
Right.
Russia, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, they all need to be involved.
Yeah.
The findings of this investigation could have huge legal and political ramifications.
This is a story we'll definitely revisit as more information comes to light. But for now, let's shift gears a bit and delve deeper into some of the specific details surrounding the crash itself.
Okay.
I think it will help us understand the bigger picture even better.
Sounds good. So let's rewind back to that moment when the plane was trying to land in Grozny. It's crucial to grasp the context of those ongoing drone attacks.
Right.
It adds a whole other layer of complexity to the situation.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what it must have been like for the people on that plane.
Oh, yeah.
Knowing that there were these active attacks happening right where they were trying to land.
Absolutely.
It must have been terrifying.
And just to make things even more tense, we have a local security official in Chechnya, Kamzat Kadyov,
Okay.
who also happens to be the nephew of the Chechen leader, Ramzan Kadyov.
Right.
He came out and claimed that all drones were successfully shot down on the morning of the crash.
So if what he's saying is true, wouldn't that mean that Russian forces were probably on high alert?
Yeah.
Maybe even more likely to overreact to anything that seemed like a threat?
That's certainly a possibility worth considering.
Yeah.
If they believed they were under attack, their response might have been, quicker, even if it ended up being a tragic mistake.
This is where the conflicting information gets even more puzzling.
Yeah.
Because Russia's saying that they offered the pilot other places to land because of the fog and the drone attacks. But then we have Muzabakov, the Azerbaijani lawmaker, claiming that the plane was intentionally sent away from Russian airspace with its GPS turned off.
Right.
That's a pretty serious accusation.
It's the heart of the mystery, isn't it? If we take Muzabakov's claim at face value, it makes you wonder, why would Russia send a damaged plane, possibly with injured passengers, away from their territory instead of, helping?
Right. It's like we're missing this crucial piece.
Yeah.
Just doesn't make sense.
Now, remember that air defense system that was allegedly involved, the Panzer S?
Yeah.
It's worth taking a closer look at that. You might be wondering how a short-range system like that could even hit a plane that was supposed to be, far away from Grozny, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know much about military technology, so fill me in.
Well, so the Panzer S is basically a mobile short-range air defense system.
Yeah.
And it's designed to take out things like low-flying planes, helicopters, and drones. The key thing is it's very mobile, can be deployed quickly,
Right.
which makes it a vital part of Russia's air defenses,
Okay.
especially in active conflict zones.
Okay, so because it's short range, wouldn't that mean the plane would have had to be pretty close to Grozny for the Panzer S to even be a factor?
Exactly. And that's another piece of this puzzle that doesn't quite fit with the official story that the plane was rerouted to Aktau because of, fog and attacks.
Right.
If it was actually hit by a Panzer S, it was probably much closer to Grozny than what we've been led to believe.
So we're back to that big question. Was this just a terrible accident, or was it intentional?
That's the million-dollar question, right? That's what investigators are trying to figure out.
Yeah.
So to figure out if it was an accident, they'll need to look at things like misidentification, human error, or technical malfunctions within the air defense system itself.
Right.
There are a lot of possibilities.
But if it was deliberate, I mean, that opens up a whole new can of worms.
Oh, yeah.
What would the motive be? What was the intent?
Exactly. Was it a case of mistaken identity?
Right.
Did they see the plane and think it was an enemy aircraft, even though it was a civilian airliner?
Wow.
Or is there something else we haven't even considered yet? It's a very complex situation.
It's a lot to process, and it's easy to get lost in all the speculation. But it's important to remember that behind all the questions and theories, real people lost their lives.
Absolutely.
Families are grieving, and survivors are trying to cope with the trauma of what they went through.
Yeah, it's easy to forget the human cost when we're trying to piece together the bigger picture.
And it reminds us that even in our world where we're all so connected, air travel is something we often take for granted.
Right.
Still carries risks, especially when you're flying through regions where conflict is happening.
It's a stark reminder of how fragile peace can be and the devastating impact conflict can have on people who are just trying to live their lives.
This brings us to another critical aspect of this story,
Right.
the aftermath.
Okay.
What were the immediate reactions to the crash? And what does it tell us about the broader geopolitical landscape?
Well, immediately after the crash, the focus was, of course, on rescue efforts.
Right.
And the response from Azerbaijan Airlines and the governments involved.
Yeah.
There was definitely a sense of shock and disbelief, especially in Azerbaijan, where many people were mourning the loss of their loved ones.
And beyond the initial grief and response, were there any lasting impacts?
Yeah.
On the region or on the aviation industry as a whole? Did anything change?
Absolutely. We already talked about how several airlines, including Kazakhstan's Kazakh Air, Fly Dubai, and even El Al, suspended flights to certain Russian airports after the crash.
Right.
Specifically mentioning safety concerns.
Right. And those suspensions, even if they were temporary, show that there's a serious lack of trust in the safety of airspace in that region.
Exactly. Airlines have a huge responsibility to keep their passengers and crew safe.
Yeah.
When something like this happens, it's only natural for them to reevaluate the risks of flying through certain areas.
So what does this tell us about the bigger picture, the global implications of this event?
Well, I think this incident really underscores how interconnected everything is in our world,
Right.
A plane crash in Kazakhstan involving an Azerbaijani airline and possibly Russian air defenses has consequences that reach far beyond that region.
Yeah.
It affects international relations, aviation safety protocols. Yeah.
And the perception of geopolitical stability on a global scale.
It's a powerful illustration of how quickly events can escalate.
Yeah.
And how even seemingly isolated incidents can have these far-reaching consequences.
Right.
What might seem like a regional issue can suddenly become a global concern.
Absolutely. And it highlights the critical need for clear communication,
Right.
transparency, and accountability, especially when you have multiple countries involved
Right.
and potentially conflicting interests at play.
It's a reminder that international cooperation is more important than ever.
Absolutely.
But amidst all the geopolitical complexities, we can't forget the human cost of this tragedy.
Right.
It's easy to get caught up in the political analysis and forget about the individuals who were affected.
You're absolutely right. This isn't just a geopolitical puzzle to solve.
Yeah.
It's a human tragedy with consequences that will last a lifetime for some.
It's so important to remember that even in the midst of global events, it's the individual stories that truly matter.
It's those stories that give us a deeper understanding of the human cost of conflict and tragedy.
And it's those stories that often get lost in the bigger narrative.
Right.
We need to make a conscious effort to remember the human cost of these tragedies and not let the political complexities overshadow the individual lives that were affected.
I think that's a really important point to make.
Yeah.
And with that, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this discussion.
Yeah, we have.
We've explored the facts, the different narratives, and the potential implications of this tragic crash.
Right.
There's still a lot to unpack, but I feel like we've made good progress.
I agree. And as the investigation continues, we'll undoubtedly gain more clarity on the events that led up to the crash.
Right.
And the factors that contributed to this terrible loss of life.
We'll continue to follow this story closely and provide updates as more information becomes available.
Sounds good.
But for now, let's step back and consider some of the broader implications of this event for the future of air travel and international security. What can we learn from this tragedy? And what steps can we take to prevent something like this from happening again? This whole situation, it really makes you think about the state of international air travel, especially when you're flying over conflict zones.
Yeah.
It's a sobering reminder that things aren't always as safe as we'd like to believe.
It certainly raises some tough questions about whether our current safety protocols are really enough.
Right.
And if international cooperation is truly effective in preventing tragedies like this, are we doing everything we can to protect civilian aircraft?
Right. That's such an important point.
I'm not so sure.
Because this crash really seems to have exposed some serious gaps in the system.
Right.
So how do we even begin to make things safer?
Right.
How do we improve airspace security, particularly in these regions where there's such a high risk of conflict?
Yeah.
It feels like a daunting challenge.
It's a question that has no easy answers, that's for sure. Some experts are calling for much stricter international rules for airspace over conflict zones. They're even talking about things like mandatory no-fly zones.
Wow.
That would be enforced by international organizations.
Okay.
It's a bold idea, but it could be a step in the right direction.
I see the logic in that, but I can also imagine it would be incredibly difficult to get all the countries on board with something like that.
Yeah.
There are so many geopolitical sensitivities, competing interests.
Absolutely.
It feels like a logistical nightmare.
You're absolutely right. Getting everyone to agree on these kinds of measures is a major hurdle. And then on top of that, you have to factor in the rapid development of all this advanced weaponry like drones and these sophisticated anti-aircraft systems.
Right.
These technologies, they can be a real threat to civilian aircraft, even if it's unintentional.
Yeah.
It's like we're constantly playing catch up.
So are we essentially in an arms race when it comes to airspace security?
In a way, yes. We can't afford to stand still.
Yeah.
We need to constantly be assessing and adapting our safety measures to keep up with these advancements. This means investing in better surveillance and detection systems, improving communication and coordination between civilian and military air traffic control, and developing stronger technologies to actually protect the aircraft themselves.
Okay, so it sounds like an enormous undertaking, one that requires significant resources and global collaboration.
You're right. It's a global issue that demands a global solution. We need a truly coordinated effort from the international community to really tackle these challenges and ensure that flying is safe for everyone.
This crash is a wake-up call for the whole world. We can't wait for another tragedy to happen before we take some decisive action. We need to be proactive, not reactive.
Absolutely. The stakes are simply too high to ignore this. We need to prioritize this issue and work together to find solutions that actually work.
Right.
Solutions that can actually prevent similar incidents from happening again. We owe it to the victims and their families to learn from this tragedy.
Well, this has been a heavy but incredibly important conversation.
Yeah.
I think we've only just begun to scratch the surface of the complexities
It's true.
surrounding this event.
I agree. This incident will continue to have ripple effects for years to come. It will shape the future of air travel and international relations in ways we can't even fully anticipate right now.
As we learn more about what caused this crash, we need to stay informed, have these difficult conversations, and demand accountability from those responsible.
I agree.
This story is far from over.
It's not.
And we'll continue to follow it closely and guide you through the complexities as they emerge. But for now, we'll leave you with this. In a world where conflict and uncertainty seem to be increasing, how can we guarantee the safety and security of international air travel? What role do we, as individuals and as a global community, have in ensuring that flying remains a safe and reliable way to connect with the world?
These are questions that deserve our attention and our thoughtful consideration. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.